computer?
Sounds like it could be plumbing. It sounds like those people you have locked up in the basement.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's the people in the basement. It's not a big deal. They're
No
fine.
big whoop.
They're going to be fine.
They're much better off than they were before.
I think we're scaring Eric.
It's all right. I'm sure he brings them food now and then.
Bring some food once a day. A little bit of air as well, so we're fine.
Yeah, Eric's one of the people in the basement, actually. Let him out today. All right, cool. All right, well, welcome, Eric. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just start up front here with a quick introduction for everyone who may be watching the stream so they know what the heck's going on. And then I'll probably just, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of have you give a little introduction of yourself and we'll jump into the conversation. All right. So welcome. This is a business podcast mastermind. This was started by a few talented friends in the business and podcasting space. We expanded to create a weekly event where a wider audience can join. We have a few hosts, and among them is Rob Green-Lee. Can give a wave. He's the VP of Content and Partnerships at Libsyn, former chair of the Podcast Academy, co-host of the New Media Show, and longtime evangelist of the podcasting industry. We also have Henry Lopez. He's a serial entrepreneur, small business coach, and host of the top-rated How Business podcast, dedicated to helping others start, run, and grow their small businesses. Vinay Koshi didn't jump in yet, but he's often here. He's the host of the Predictable B2B podcast, founder of Sproutworth. He helps others achieve predictable business growth and influence through content marketing. And I'm Ethan Janney, business and executive coach and co-host of the Run With It podcast, as well as the Edge of NFT podcast. And in first one, we help entrepreneurs figure out what kind of business ideas they want to get going with. And the second one is pretty self-explanatory. So without further ado, let me introduce Eric. He can even pronounce his last name for us because I'm not going to try that. Skorzynski. Very nice. Yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from today and how you think you can be a service to us podcasters here.
Yeah, my name is Eric Skorzynski. I live in Henderson, Nevada, so about 15 minutes from the Las Vegas Strip. I started working with Travis Chappell, who is a business podcaster. He started a show called Build Your Network. We just are getting ready to release episode 633 of that show. We've had some awesome guests like Grant Cardone, John Maxwell, Dean Graziosi, a big long list, Tommy Lahren, Matt Barnes, the list goes on and on. I've been working with him on that show, both as a producer and as a co-host. As a producer since probably 120 episodes in, and then started co-hosting about 3 months ago on the show. And then I also have a podcast of my own called the Preacher Boys Podcast. I actually deal with victims of sexual abuse within the religious denomination I grew up in. It's been going for a little over a year and has crossed 500,000 downloads so far. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, awesome stuff. Yeah, so the way we run things here is typically I'll kind of spend some time chatting with you, then maybe some of the other hosts might chime in with their questions or comments, and then we'll open it up to everyone for maybe the last 15 or so. Although Mark's been here a while, so he can probably just jump in whenever he likes. Yeah, so my first question is, with the podcast, you said you're now getting into co-hosting the podcast. What was that transition like? And, kind of what prompted the decision to start getting involved?
Yeah, it was pretty natural. Like I said, I've been working alongside Travis for almost 3 years now, I think just over 3 years. And we started just kind of doing the solo episodes. We started turning those into a solo episode with a producer chiming in. And basically it was me prompting him so he could, slow pitch down the middle so he could hit home runs on those episodes. And then what really happened is it was just practical. So we started upping our release schedule. We release 6 times a week now, just because we have so many interviews on the docket. And so it just didn't make sense with him launching a software company, which I can talk about a little bit because that's adjacent to this. It didn't make sense for him to be taking all of these different interviews. So I started just slipping into that role. I already had a show of my own. I'm used to the format. And so it was kind of a good logical decision for us to move that way.
Sorry, I was muted. And did you start your own show, even though it's a show of your own? Did you start it like already having seen Travis's podcast and being inspired by it, or was this just something that you completely started independently?
Yeah, so I actually come from a production background. So I originally started in video production, then started working with Travis and started understanding the world of audio podcasting, which in the beginning did not appeal to me at all because I liked visual creation. I liked doing videos and graphic design. And so when I started working with him, I started working with some clients he was referring who were all podcasters. I started doing production, started helping them grow their shows. They had big success with their stuff. And, I started kicking around this idea for a documentary. And I was like, why don't I do this as a podcast? And so I kind of went head first and got to essentially take all the mistakes I had seen Travis make, all the mistakes I'd seen everyone I'd work with make, skip those and get to start with a real advantage moving forward. And as we've started doing podcast coaching and working with other clients, that's what we help them do, is skip the mistakes of myself and Travis combined and give them that 1 to 2 year head start when they launch their show.
What do you think are like the top 1 to 3 things that give people a head start, or like, the converse of that? What are the huge mistakes they make that hold them back?
Yeah, the biggest ways I see people shoot themselves in the foot, and the number one thing is when people look at Joe Rogan and say, that's what my show is going to be. I'm going to sit with my friends, I'm going to drink beer, and I'm going to get paid to talk. And if it was that easy, I would do that. Like I would sit there and have beers with my friends and talk and get paid a lot of money. But the reality is Joe Rogan started before podcasts were anything. He started early on. If you watch his first podcast episode on YouTube, it was awful, but he was first to the game. He's Joe Rogan. Second of all, he was a former Fear Factor host, UFC commentator. He has a lot of things like, I'm not Joe Rogan, so I'm not going to start a Joe Rogan podcast. So I'd say the first thing is people try to go super broad and just think that they're interesting enough to carry a show, and they don't pick a topic, whether you want to call it a niche or if you want to steal Russell Brunson's blue ocean idea, they don't find something that they can dive into and cover something that hasn't been covered that way before. And then the other thing I would say, and this really leads into our software company, is a lot of people wait till they have credibility to start reaching out to big guests. And what we've done is kind of go after a credibility first method, which is we're going to go for people who have big names, big followings. We're going to get a lot of no's, but when we get those yeses, we can bring that credibility into our show and leverage that to grow a lot faster. And so we didn't wait to start asking a John Maxwell to come on the show. We began those reach outs early on, because once you can get a John Maxwell on your show, the credibility of your show and the ability to grow is a lot faster.
Yeah, I've noticed that's an interesting play when you're first starting out. A lot of people will ask you, like, how many downloads do you have? Even if you've got some of the greatest guests around, maybe nobody knows about that, right? Or maybe they've heard them other places and they're more than willing to just go check out the other resources. And I've seen that as an alternative to saying, hey, here's look at our downloads, is to say, hey, look at our list of past guests. Mm-hmm. And you can give that to potential new guests, and you can also give that to even advertisers and things like that as a way to show your credibility. In fact, I think as I was engaging with Travis about booking you guys, that's what I did when because we actually don't, in terms of this group, it's more about the niche of the group. And we got some really cool people in here. So it's interesting. But now when it comes down to sort of leveraging the credibility of the podcast guests, I guess it's been going on a while. Is it something where you feel like you really have to hit the promotional aspect of it really hard to kind of, I don't know, make it worth their while, or is it just a matter of just getting them on and doing what you do and growing it?
Well, as the name Build Your Network implies, like, we're really big on relationships. And so, there are a lot of people, everything that I'm saying could be done the wrong way. Like, there's people that just try to, ride on the backs of other people, but we also have to put out a good show. And as you kind of indicated, a lot of people get worried about downloads. How am I going to go get this big guest if I don't have 1 million downloads an episode? And there are some that are going to ask you that. But as anyone here who's had guests on their show know, that's not always the first question that's out of their mouth. Like, there's a lot of other pieces to that. And one of the best and worst things about podcasting, it's great for podcasters, not so much for people choosing podcasts to go on. You can't see someone's downloads. There's not an easy, accessible way to check it out. Yeah, you could go through Chartable and get an estimation that might be off by, 3 million. But there's really no way to see that. So unless you go in as a podcaster and say, hey, I'm so sorry, I only have like 20 downloads, but I'd love to have you on my show. If you don't say that, they don't know that. You can tell them what information you want. So again, giving the name of a credible guest, which what we do literally now that we have such a roster of guests, is we'll go to the person we'll reach out to, look at who they're following on Instagram that matches someone we've interviewed before. And that's our list of people on the email that we include. We've interviewed this person, this person, this person. They're going to see someone who, sets them on fire and says, I want to be on the show that Grant Cardone was on, or Tom Bilyeu was on, and so on and so forth. The real value is just saying very clearly, we're not going to waste your time. Here's what we're hoping to get from the conversation, and coming across as a peer and not a raving fan, not coming in saying like, we live or die by whether or not this person joins me on my podcast. Like, we're doing this. Do you want in? We'd love to have you add this value. And by doing that, keeping it short and sweet and not wasting their time, we've gotten a lot more yeses than I think most people would expect.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about the play that you have as far as the business goes with the podcast. I'm sure, having produced this many episodes, there's probably some advertising involved, but then you're also sort of networking, and can you share a little bit about what I don't want to call them funnels because it sounds weird with podcasting, but
Yeah.
It's sort of like the funnels that people move through, whether they're a guest or whether they're a listener or, a potential client, something like that.
Yeah, it's definitely morphed. And as I'm sure you guys know, like the number one way to monetize is not always sponsors, because sponsors requires a lot of downloads, which at this point, the sponsor money is good. But for the first 2 or 3 years, that was a minority. It still is by design, one of the smaller pieces of it. The number one way to monetize as far as like actual income level is by having a product or service of your own. And that's existed since the beginning. We started with masterminds, and Travis literally created a mastermind called Cool People, Cool Places, and invited 6 and 7 figure entrepreneurs who were legitimately cool people to go hang out in Thailand for a retreat. It started really small with that. He didn't make any money on that, but built really strong relationships with people that are still part of our network today. And that's developed. We just did our last Cool People, Cool Places retreat in Costa Rica just a few weeks ago. And that same thing. Now we're bringing higher level coaches, and it's become a really cool kind of experience. But the other piece of that has been a lot of coaching, and that's been primarily podcast coaching, because while Travis started the show surrounding networking, people wanted to know, how'd you get John Maxwell on your show? How'd you get this person on your show? And so it kind of created the product of, here's how to create a show where you can leverage credibility and bring on really good guests who bring a lot of credibility to your brand. And most recently, what we've really been pushing has been, again, just another evolution of that, is a new software that we've created called Guestio. And Guestio is a guest booking marketplace. And I know that, when you think of guest booking marketplaces, you think of really crappy email lists and really ugly websites with guests that you would never want to have on your show. And so we decided to create a very elite guest booking service where we have both paid and free guests. We have, people like myself on there who have a newer show, who are trying to just get a lot of traction, appear on as many shows as possible. But we've also got people on there like, Manny Pacquiao, which someone's booked for to launch, one of their shows dealing with sports. We've got people on there who founded Comic Con. We've got, top performance coaches. So we've got some really good quality people on there. And again, the idea is taking the inaccessible people, making them super accessible to the average person. And so instead of wasting, a couple grand on Facebook ads that don't convert to podcast listeners, you could book 3 or 4 really credible guests and use those in marketing your show launch.
I'm curious your thoughts about paying people to be on a podcast. So there's actually 2 sides of it, which I think have come up in our conversations here. One is, I'm a podcast host and somebody wants to be on my podcast, and I actually charge them a fee to come on the podcast. And then the other side of it is the reverse. Oh, I want this. I invited this person to be on my show, and they said, sure, it's, $500. Any thoughts on kind of the value of that? If there is a value, how to optimize it, whether or not to do it yourself if you're a host?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so there's two pieces of this. One, a lot of times when someone says, and I'm sure when you reach out, everybody's had the experience of, oh, sure, it's this much. Usually that just means no. But hey, if you do say yes, we'll make a little bit of money. So a lot of people do. I'll give you an example. So myself and Travis. Travis used to be free on Guestio to book. Because he wanted to just get the word out as much as possible. Now that we've doubled down in the software thing, we're meeting with developers, he's doing meetings all day, traveling, it doesn't make sense to be doing that. So it's a quick, easy restriction to filter out people that you don't want to deal with. Myself, on the other hand, I'm trying to build a lot of momentum behind my show because I'm working on a lot of things that are going to require a lot of listeners' attention. So any show that will have me, I'll come on and I'll preach about my brand for 30 minutes. So right now I have it set to free. When I want to start filtering out just the random shows, I'll put some kind of price tag. Even $10 is going to filter all the people you probably don't want to talk to because there's some price commitment there. Now, when it comes to actually paying a guest to come on your show, I have not yet paid for a guest to come on my show, but there are certain guests where if I had a easy to see price tag, I would pay the amount to have them come on my show. People that are extremely inaccessible who would bring a ton of value to my overall brand. For example, we just had someone come through us who wrote a book and they're trying to appear on several different shows. So they paid to appear on several different podcasts for their book tour, as opposed to paying for extra in Facebook advertising, all these different routes. And it makes sense when you know the stats about podcasts and how likely people are to buy, the actual demographics of people, how much they listen to an episode. It's a huge credibility play to appear on a show like the Jordan Harbinger show or Impact Theory or fill in the blank with all these different shows. So do I recommend paying, every single show that comes in your way or charging every show that comes your way? No, not necessarily, but there are plays where it makes sense, like a book launch or a company startup, or just I can't get a hold of, this A-list celebrity, so I'll pay them to come on my show as opposed to doing 2 years of reach outs.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was actually for a conference I was recently a part of. Folks were reaching out and trying to get Gary Vee, right, to be a speaker at the conference. Interestingly enough, they did get Mark Cuban, which is kind of cool. But working on Gary Vee and, getting close, getting higher and higher. And then it came out, okay, this is the fee that it's going to be. And it's kind of like, like this is not going to work.
Yeah.
Often.
Sorry. I was going to say the other piece of that too. One of the stories we had reaching out to Gary Vee was back in the early days of Build Your Network. Gary made some kind of offer. They would come on if we bought, fill in the blank many cases of wine, I think it was at the time.
That's
fun. Which, now if he made that exact same offer, I forget what it was. Now if he made the same offer, we'd probably do it to get him on for an hour to have a real conversation.
Right.
But, at the time that was his easy way of putting a no. But one of the things I will say that we're working on, I think I'm allowed to say this. One of the things we're working on is allowing people to also put things like that in their account. So say, someone says, oh, I will only do an interview if you buy 100 books or if you buy 200 of this. We're going to kind of introduce that sort of barter system in the marketplace where guys like Gary, who would see a lot more value in that than say a financial, deposit in his account, in that case, like that opens the door for a lot more opportunities to kind of barter with the network and what you can bring to the table.
Yeah. I like that actually. That's kind of it's a fun way to do that kind of a value exchange, especially if you have a product like wine where it's like, hey, I'll take some wine. Excuse to have a few glasses of wine.
And this is the misconception too, is that a lot of people say, well, nobody's paying for podcasts. So like that's one of the big pieces, but people are paying publicists to get them on shows. but publicists aren't paying the shows to get people on them. We had a VIP client come out just recently, and he had done an interview on Travis's show. He had paid, I forget what it was, like $3,000 or $4,000 to a publisher to set it up. We didn't make money off of that.
Right.
Their publicist made $4,000 to send an email that we said yes to.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are willing to pay. They're just paying the wrong people. It's not benefiting the show, and it's not really benefiting the person, because we would not have charged them $4,000 to come on the show. That's crazy that he paid that, you know. But again, someone's pocketing the money somewhere. It's better to go from show to host and, you know, guest to host versus being, you know, guest to publicist who puts them on 20 crappy shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I have a question here too.
Yeah.
So how do you see the balance right now between the show and the guest around the promotion of the conversation or the interview? Are you seeing that weighted more towards the show side and guests walking away from doing that, or is it depends on the guest?
So it really depends. So there's two pieces. One, I mean, part of this, as always, depends on the show to make really good assets for the guest to share, and knowing how they're going to share. So just on the practical side across the board, you know, we always encourage people to create graphics that are in the style that the guest usually shares. So if their color scheme's usually red, do that. You know, story posts are more likely to get shared because they don't take place in the permanent feed. So reposts like that usually go a lot better. So there are steps you can take to improve the chance of someone sharing an episode. On the Guestio side, say you book an interview with, you know, Jordan Harbinger, who gets however many downloads he gets a month. You book an interview with him, there are options to pay him an additional rate to guarantee that he'll either run an ad on his show, post something to his Facebook page, post to Instagram. And so, you know, we had somebody who had, I forget who the guest was, but they ended up choosing to spend another couple grand in paying for that person to do shout outs on their Instagram, tag them in a certain amount of posts. You know, there was a lot of different pieces to that. And so that is another piece. And it does make sense, you know, because part of the value is you getting their network. So having Jordan Harbinger in your show is one thing. Having Jordan mention your show on his show and post to his Instagram feed, that's worth a ton. That's, I mean, I was going to say you can't put a price tag on that, but you can. And it's probably worth it given the audience that he has and the trust he has with his audience.
Yeah. And Jordan's spending close to $40,000 a month just in buying ads on other podcasts to promote his podcast.
Right.
So he's doing a lot. Yeah.
Well, it's easier to convert a podcast listener to another podcast than it is converting a Facebook person scrolling to go off the platform to figure out what, you know, podcast platform they're on, and then hope that they're a podcast listener at all. And what we realized early on is whenever we'd spend money on Facebook ads to the show itself, obviously not to offers, but to the show itself, we would waste a lot of money because you have to first find a podcast listener. If they're not, you have to convince them that podcasts are a good idea. And then beyond that, you have to convince them that your show is worth downloading a podcast app to check out. And so you're spending a lot to get one lead to listen to your show, and you have no information on them past that. It's just a download number.
Yeah. You know, one thing that I'm realizing here as we talked about various things is that people who've been in podcasting, even for a year and a half, 2 years, you know, a handful, 4 years, 5 years, whatever, they've got assets. They have an asset that they've sort of built up. And let me preface the question that I'm going to throw out here with the idea of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Are you familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect?
I'm not, no.
So the Dunning-Kruger effect, you know, there's a lot of jokes and internet memes about it. It's a actual scientific study that these guys Dunn and Kruger performed, and what they found is that you know, you've got a curve of people that are good at stuff and not good at stuff, right? And the people that are like beginners at stuff or not good at it often overestimate their ability. You know, people who do poorly on a test think that they did better. But the inverse of that is also true. And people who are actually really good at stuff often underestimate their ability. And, there's various reasons why they think that's the case. One of them, which is most convincing to me, is like it's kind of so familiar to them that they forget that not everybody else knows it. I mean, I think of like, I play piano. I actually hadn't played in a while. Finally moved a piano over to my house. I'd been busy with other stuff. I sat down and I played, and I was like, oh, this is hard stuff. Like a normal person couldn't just sit down and play this. Like, this is pretty cool that I can do this. So that was all a preface to ask, having sort of a little bit of an outsider perspective as you help people with podcasting, what do you see like podcasters don't know that they have if they've been in the game for a year or two, like some sort of asset or something that they can leverage?
Yeah, I mean, I usually see the inverse of it, which is people assume they have more than they have, which is a lot of times, a lot of times there's people who start off and say, I have a really cool concept and nobody wants to be on my show, or I'm going to do a solo show and people will listen. It's like, no, without guests, it's going to be a really slow climb because nobody knows, likes, or trusts you yet at all. And it's one thing that even now, even with my show, I have a very strong fan base of people that tune in. I have a good Facebook group of 2,000 people. I've got YouTube subscribers. I've got a list of people that come and flock and engage on my posts. And even now, like, I have to maintain that sense of humility and gratitude when I do book a guest on my show, and realize that yes, there are people now, way more than when I started, that listen for me than there were when I got the show moving. But still, like, I need to understand there's always room to grow, always people that can bring in other perspectives and value to the show. Most people think that their show is inherently valuable, and that's not true. That's like, everybody has a blog. Is it inherently valuable? No, most blogs get no traction, and so you have to understand there's room to grow, and you have to understand that most of the things that are making your show work don't fall back on you. Like, it's probably guests, it's probably topic, like there's some piece there that draws people in. Now, the other side of that, people that have value that don't realize it, one, just length of doing a show is a huge piece of credibility. Most podcasters, I think, quit after 7 episodes. The ones that quit, a lot don't make it past 1. There's 2 million 2 million podcasts. There's 860,000 that are actually active, that actually post. So I joked with Travis. I said, to win in podcasting, just don't quit. Just keep doing it, and you're going to beat most of the people, over 50% of them.
Yeah, it's actually close to 4 million now. Shows.
Wow, really?
What?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's
Wasn't
crazy.
it
So that
like
must be
less than a
recent,
million,
because-
like a year and a half ago
Yeah.
or something?
Yeah, it's been growing about 100,000 a month.
Wow.
That's wild. People starting it, quitting it, especially with Anchor, things where you can start free. Like,
Well, that's
a lot of
where
people just
most of
throw
them
one out
are
to
being
see.
birthed from, right?
It's crazy. Yeah. And Spotify's blowing it up right now. But again, length of the show, again, the network, most people do one and dones with their guests and never reach out again. And one of the big wins for Build Your Network, as a podcast, has been, we've maintained follow-up with guests, moving beyond the show, trying to add value, and doing the networking piece and keeping them happy. For our first live event that we did here in Vegas 2 years ago, we had guests like Dan Fleischman, Brad Lee. We had a big roster. I think we had 20 speakers that came in for the 3 days. We didn't pay a speaker's fee for anybody. We paid for their travel, but they were all super down to come out and speak and hang out for a little bit. And we still gave them gifts and made it worth their time and allowed them to promote their stuff. But that's super difficult to do with people that are usually very busy coming out and doing all these events all year round. And so just being able to focus on the relationship and realize your relationship is the biggest asset you have. When you have somebody agree to come on your show and you get an hour to leave an impression, like, that's super, super valuable. And you need to keep those relationships moving. Keep yourself in front of them, not in an aggressive, pitchy, here's my new software company and this, but hey, I just interviewed this guest. I think they'd be a really good connection for you. I can't tell you how many times we've done that. How many times we've had a real estate investor on who we've sent over to a real estate expert we've had on, or a software technician to a software engineer, or fill in the blank. Making those connections with people has been invaluable. It's the reason that, Guestio has so many people on there that are familiar names. And the reason we've got investors in Guestio, like former NBA player like Matt Barnes, like it's a pretty big pool of people that you start to get to add value to. And when the time comes, that value, it's the law of reciprocity, right? It comes back to you in a big way.
But so there's like an interesting dichotomy is that, once you have 600 episodes, now you've had so many different people involved trying to maintain the relationship in some way. Sounds like it could get a little bit overwhelming, like to have each person feel like they're special in some way.
Right. Well, and obviously you're going to have some that are going to, out of 600, there's going to be ones that made you feel a certain way, that are good relationships. You're going to interview people that, maybe they don't gel with you in a real way. You have a good conversation, but it doesn't move past that. But having, we've got some people we've interviewed who maybe aren't, a household name, but they're just a super cool, valuable person, someone that you build a relationship with. So yeah, you can't be texting directly with all 600 people, but the most important thing is just what I said is remembering in your Rolodex, like, hey, I just talked to this person. They mentioned that they need someone to help them with, business management. Okay, let me redirect them to this person that we've interviewed. And a lot of times too, this is the other thing that's really been fun, is a lot of these streams don't cross. Like one of the people we had on the show was like a household name as far as the real estate world, but he wanted to talk to a household name in, I forget what the region was, software world. And we're thinking like, oh, you should be able to just pick up the phone and call whoever you want. Like you're a huge name, but he didn't know how to get into that stream. So he asked Travis, he said, hey, I know you had this person on your show. Can you make an introduction for me? So now Travis gets the pleasure of going in and saying, hey, you from this world, you guys would do great stuff together. And now forever moving forward, they're going, thanks to Build Your Network, Travis Chappell and the team there, like now we have this relationship and this company. And so it's easier than it sounds, but it also has to be more intentional than most people make it.
Yeah, I think that's just going back to that topic of the assets people have that they don't realize. It's really easy to see people who are great at one thing and imagine that they have facility in lots of different domains. I've got a good friend who's great in health and wellness, and he wanted to edit a video, to make like part of it a little bit longer. Just all he had to do was copy and paste like part of the video. He did not do that himself because he doesn't, for whatever reason, he doesn't see himself as somebody who could do that. Right. So other people had to jump in and do that. Or people who I'm seeing it all the time, people who are great with something like professionally, but podcasting, like they want to do podcasting, but that just seems like, ugh, oh,
that's the funniest one to me is people reach out to us who, again, for example, and I could share this because he shared it on Travis' podcast episode. Matt Barnes has a top sports podcast, like the number one sports podcast, and reached out to Travis to ask his advice on his kid's podcast. And it's like, you could call anyone at ESPN, at all these different places, but like he reached out about podcasting because like he didn't know where to even start. And like, so it's kind of this just interesting thing of like people, again, value that you don't realize you have, like just knowing how to start a podcast puts you in this weird world where you can have guys like that reach out to you and offer real value. And again, the big piece of that too is don't do the shady version of that, which is, I'll help you start your podcast if I get a producer credit or this. Like, no, focus on the relationship first. And, when it comes time to make an ask, like you have a relationship established instead of doing what, most people would have done, which is, oh, Matt Barnes' kids have a podcast. He wants to ask me to help. Like, how do I get this listed on it? Or how do I get this piece of credit instead of just offering the help?
I'm going to ask you a very personal, not a personal question for you, like getting personal, but something that is personally going on with me right now. I have a friend who I think is really great, and they've got a podcast, and there's a lot that could be done to make it better. And they kind of have the sense that I could be helpful to them. And they kind of want to keep meeting and having conversations and asking, and I'm realizing like, I just don't have the time for this. I would really love to help you. I don't have the time for this. And I don't know that they have the money for it to like pay me to do it. It's really difficult to introduce the topic. Do you have any advice there? Do you just say no? Hey guys, sorry, I'm gonna have to leave you on your own.
Yeah, I mean, saying no is good, and I think you have to start saying no at some point with a lot of those things. And I have things as well. Like I had a guy reach out to me who it wasn't a close friend. Close friends make it harder, right? Because it's someone that you have a good relationship with. But I had an acquaintance that I used to work with, and he started a show. It's not good, and he kept sending me messages saying, "Hey, we should do an interview swap. I could be on your show, you could be on mine." I'm like, I'm getting on this newer show, I'm getting 40,000 downloads a month. You're getting, I'm guessing, 4. Like the value is very disproportionate, and more importantly, because I would have said yes if he was in the same field and had a decent, I don't care about just the downloads. Like, is it a good relationship, performance? But his show was like a comedy show. My show deals with, clergy abuse. Like, I'm sorry, like I don't know where that crossover is going to happen. So saying no is not a bad thing. What I will say is there's also a lot of really simple paid done for you courses that walk through a lot of those questions and answers. And so what I would encourage, if they're taking it seriously and they want to move to the next level, like find a course that can walk through all those answers for them and just say, hey, maybe you should check this out, and give them some kind of asset that's gonna walk them through the process. And again, at the point and there's some really simple starter courses. Like I think we have one that's like $90 a month, or $90 for how to launch your show. But if $90 is too much, like maybe they don't want to start a podcast, like maybe that's, maybe there's something there. And there's just a lot of free stuff. I've gotten really good at just saying, hey, here's Pat Flynn's, how to edit your show. Here's a 7-minute video you can watch. Because it shouldn't, man. Like for someone who's doing a lot of stuff, you shouldn't be just at the beck and call of every podcaster coming up, like, unless they're willing to pay for your time.
Right.
And again, one meeting is fine. Like I'll usually meet with someone and help them launch their show, or say, hey, don't make a Joe Rogan style podcast. I'll give them that basic advice. But beyond that, like, for speaking for myself, like I have coaching calls all day, every day with people who are paying for that information. I can't jump into all of those new 4 million podcasts and help walk through every step.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for sharing. I'm curious if Mark or Henry had any comments or questions to throw in. The time's moving on. I know Henry, you've been focusing a little bit on coaching opportunities for your guests, but it's more business coaching. It's not podcast coaching. But I'm wondering if there's any overlap in this kind of. Are they the audience members that tend to come in for the podcast coaching, Eric, for your show?
Oh, sorry, can you say it broke up a little bit?
In terms of who comes in as clients for the podcast coaching, they're the listeners of the podcast. Like that's how they find it, or like, is it a different kind of group?
Yeah. So there's 2 pieces to that as well. And Henry, this actually would be right up your alley as a business coach. But there's 2 pieces. One, we have listeners who, again, the reason they come to us is because they heard someone that they appreciate and admire on the show, and they want to know how to start a show where they could also talk to those people. So yes, our podcast listeners definitely are a big piece of that. We have a very specific way that we bring people in, from being just a download to getting them into our Facebook group, to having a reach out and all that to get them into our systems. We spend a lot in paid ads just to cold traffic as well, that runs to a webinar, that runs to our podcast training. So there's a lot of ways we're bringing in those kind of clients. But the other piece of that too, for high level coaching, it comes from 2 places. One, we do what we call guest facing monetization. So we have some of our interviews on our show are ideal clients. They're 6 and 7 figure entrepreneurs that want to start a show, don't know where to get started. And so what we've done is we booked a lot of people that are, 1, a good guest, but 2, an ideal client for us. And we build an hour of rapport with them, and build that relationship. And the way we do this, again, It's not the seedy way of, hey, I got you for an interview. Now I'm going to pitch you for an hour afterward that you did not schedule to do. What we do is really simple. We literally start our interview with what we call a ninja ad read. And so we'll, say I'm sitting down with a real estate investor, which is a lot of our clients. They want to build relationships with other investors or agents. In the beginning of the show, hey, we'll tell the guest, hey, we're going to have you on in just a second. We're going to do a quick ad read, and then we'll dive into the show. So they're sitting there, they're perked up, they're waiting to hear themselves get called on so they don't sound like an idiot when they say, oh, sorry, hey, let's get started. And, we'll do the ad and say, hey guys, before we get into the show, if you are a business owner, an investor, fill in the blank, 2 other things, we include their category in that statement. So they're sitting there, they're already geared in. They hear a word that ties in. You don't want to be super specific on that. Like, hey, if you're a Keller Williams realtor,
if your name is XYZ sitting across from me.
Right. Right. Like but you can hit that thing. It is actually valuable to them. What happens a surprising amount is that at the end of the call, after billing an hour where they actually like you, if the interview goes well, they're going to say, hey, in the beginning, you mentioned this. Like, is podcasting actually going to help someone who does like real estate investing? Then you have a conversation. If they don't ask that, you had a good conversation for an hour with somebody and you got all the value of a normal podcast. And it's a really simple way to bring in those high level clients very directly without having to call and pitch people for 5 minutes. You're getting to talk with them for an hour. And the way that you're presenting your offer is not even direct to them. It's just a general ad read to your audience that might be beneficial to them as well.
I think from my point of view, so I've actually started a spin-off podcast business with matching guests with podcasts.
Okay.
And what I've found is it's an easy conversation after you finished an hour podcast to then just say, look, we've got this business. You are a guest on my podcast. Would this be of interest to you? It's not a hard pitch. It's just a gentle, look, this is what we're doing now. Yeah. And we get a lot of interest from that. And the other thing I was going to say was that you were saying, Ethan, earlier on about what assets you have. So I've done over 300 episodes of my podcast, and I find that gives me quite a bit of authority, whether I'm dealing with podcast people. I'm actually a business coach as well, with my coaching business as well, because I can refer to a particular podcast, whether it's a podcast guest or a podcast interest, someone's interested, or in business coaching. If you say you've got 300 episodes, their ears prick up immediately.
Yeah.
Then can make a direct link, as you say, like if it's a property person or a real estate person, you mentioned that you had someone on that might be a good fit for you to have a conversation with, or just that there's a relationship with that person. I think you're absolutely right. I think it gives, once you've got an amount of content, there gives you more latitude. Obviously, you can do ads for your own products. I don't advertise other people's services, but I sometimes advertise certain services that I do. I think it just it's a nice place where if people are committed to your podcast and have listened for a while, they are interested in other services you provide. They are interested in, or if a guest sees that you've done a bunch of episodes with real estate people, it builds up sort of credibility. So right. I think from a business point of view, it's a really, I would say I don't pitch hard on anything. Yeah. But as you say, like once you've built up a group of people that are interested in what you're doing, it's a natural way of almost like a funnel to be able to move them to other parts of your business.
Right. And that's why, we have a format called image, like what every piece of content should be. And the A in that is for actionable. And for anybody who's a coach, like we offer a lot of coaching, like if you can give people actionable steps near the end of your episodes that they can have little wins with, then when you do offer a paid program or you do offer direct one-on-one coaching, if people have had wins because of your content for 300 episodes, they're going to start wondering, what happens if I pay this guy $2,000? Am I going to have those wins in an accelerated way? Obviously, at that point, as we all know, there's a lot of shady business coaches out there. At that point, you have to deliver on that. But if you can give them a couple wins early on, like you're basically grooming your audience to believe and buy into your brand. It's the know, like, and trust with you. And I love what you said, like promote your own products. Like, you have all this valuable real estate. People listen to 90%, or I think it's 80% now, 80% of a podcast episode. So you've got people that are tuning in that trust you, they're listening to you. Get them used to hearing you make a request to join in a free program, to join into a course. Get them used to it, whether it's paid or unpaid. They need to know that there is an opportunity to move even faster than what the podcast is providing them.
Yeah, something I did it's pre-COVID was for I think it was about 8 episodes, so sort of like 4 weeks or 6 weeks. I did a thing at the end of the episode where I said that there was a secret club and there was going to be a get together on whatever the date was, whatever the time was, and if you go onto this landing page, you can join this secret club, and we'll get together. Now, I was expecting 0 people to turn up. Now, I think it was 3 or 4 people turned up, and actually, like, because as you said, like, most people listen to 60-80% of an episode. Most of them don't ever get to the end. So I wanted to incentivize people with it, but being in a very organic sort of way. As I say, we had 4 people. We talked about podcasting, we talked about business, we chewed the fat about what was going on in the world, and there was no format to it. I could have attached an actionable, I didn't do this, but I really genuinely wanted to sort of say, like, those people that are interested to listen to all my podcasts, here's something fun we can do. And as I say, it was a Friday night. We had 4 people, 2 people from the UK, 2 people from the US, and we just chewed the fat for an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that, about all different types of things. There could have been something actionable. There could have led them on to something else. But to be honest, that was just something, a bit of fun for
building a relationship too with your ideal listener. Like you're building a strong connection. Like, and I've done that stuff too, where it's for the first year of Build Your Network, we had a call to action in the show notes saying schedule a free 10-minute feedback call to let us know what you like and dislike about the show. So, like, again, early on, and again, depending where you're at in your business is whether or not you can do this, but like Travis had in his calendar to take on, I think it was like 10-minute calls. Ask them, what do you like? What do you dislike about the show? Why do you tune in? And that's a direct phone call with a host of the podcast you're listening to, where you can give your clear feedback. Like, that built a lot of really strong relationships with people that are still listening today. And some of those people, due to the nature of the show, have very successful businesses who, still remember and value that. So, I think it's all worthwhile. It's just sometimes that step is building a relationship. Sometimes it is pushing them to a program, but it's easier to do all of the product stuff once the relationship foundation's built with your listener.
Yeah. And the whole point of networking is about, and I'm not saying you're purely networking, but I'm involved in networking groups as well. It's about creating relationships that are warm relationships that develop over a period of time to then lead on when there is a call to action, when there is a request, you're building that on a strong foundation of a warm relationship, rather than cold calling people saying, do this, can you do that, can you do that, which I get on LinkedIn all the frigging time. All I'm getting at the moment is sort of people pitching, requesting, selling, and I'm completely pissed off with it, if I'm honest.
Right.
Because they haven't, like, a couple of people that have done something which piqued my interest. Someone actually said on LinkedIn, and they asked me a question like, is this important to you? And that then stuck. I then answered, and then it then went on to, well, would you like to have a chat about it? And then it was and in the end, I don't think he did get a sale, but it's all about creating relationships which are warm, that you can then, when you want to sell, you've got that already built, that substance built in the relationship. You can't just, like, cold calling is 100 calls and you might get 3 sales at the end of it.
Right.
So for me, it's all about developing relationships, building relationships, and as you've said a couple of times, it builds solid foundations that when there is a call to action, then you can.
Well, you're building trust is what you're doing.
Mm.
At the end of the day. Yeah.
So I had a joke in my head. I'm like trying to like, do you ever have like something that a joke comes in your head and you're like, that's not funny. And so you just like, we're just trying to ignore it. I was going to say, oh, I don't build relationships. I destroy relationships. That was my joke. It was not funny, but it was in my head and I couldn't think of anything else. All right. So, well, I really appreciate you being with us, Eric. We have about like 5 minutes left. We usually sign off right at the end of the hour. So I want to make sure we'll probably have time for another topic to address. But I also want to make sure before we sign off, of course, we've talked about what you're up to, but do you want to give any sort of specific call outs to things people should check out,
the
social stuff to follow, website?
Yeah, the absolute biggest thing I'd want to push is just guestio.com. That is our booking platform. It's free to sign up. You can set up an account so you can get booked on shows. You can look through the guest list. We have a smart list feature so you can add your ideal guests, whether they be paid or free. I've booked several free guests for my show. Have been booked on several shows, which again has been very valuable and getting to promote that. So definitely just Guestio. It's guestio.com. Definitely worth checking out. And then the other big piece I would say is we have a Facebook group called Podcast to Profit. You can just go to travischappell.com/group. And that would be the other place to go hang out with all of us there and chat about podcasting. So that would be the two I'd push you to.
Cool. Yeah. And the Guestio thing sounds really interesting. There's been a lot of, I think we've all seen it over the past, few years, especially during the pandemic. Probably they got a little bit more popular when people starting podcasts of like, these matching services. And there's clearly an audience there. I mean, there's people that are looking for the guests, but like you said, it kind of sometimes it just turns into not the best opportunities, right? Or, not the most choice opportunities.
Right. Yeah. It's there's very few that have very quality guests. Like you get on the site and there's like one person they use in the advertising who's recognizable. And then it's just, there's nobody of really any interest, like it's a lot of people who've all started their shows and are looking for guests. But for someone who's been doing podcasting a while, it's hard to find someone that would be worthwhile to bring on.
Yeah. I was really surprised with, I think it was Spot a Guest. Spot a Guest was a thing that a guy started, and I'm pretty sure it went on for like a year. And I mean, I think we maybe found a guest on there. Maybe I went on some shows from there. It worked out fine. And he just one day he said, "Spot a Guest is not going to be around anymore. I'm just going to stop it." And I hope I hope he sold something out of it. I hope he got some money out of that or something. Cause like just even the fact that so many people were interested and he now had an email list of contacts that, would be great for, your product or something. Right. I was just really surprised that he just kind of abandoned the project.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, there's some really good ones on here. John Lee Dumas, Jordan Harper, like there's some good quality guests on there. So definitely worth checking out. And at the very least, it's worth putting your profile up and seeing if anyone tries to book you. So, it's a good way to get your name out there.
So kind of big picture on, you mentioned that a lot of people just aren't worth having on the podcast, I guess. So what do you see as the keys to that if you're a guest, right? If you're trying to appear on podcasts, what do you think are the key things that makes a person interesting to be on a podcast?
So like if I'm looking for a guest to come on my show?
Right. I mean, what do you think these hosts are really looking for? If you really trim it all down to the basics, what do you think they're looking for?
So the way that I look at it is always, are they going to bring credibility through name recognition or through their value of what they know? So like they may be a PhD in the topic that I cover, but nobody knows who they are. So they're either bringing credibility through their knowledge and their credentials or through their name recognition. So like they're a household name. People, it's a John Maxwell who's bringing in both. Usually they bring at least one, but they're usually bringing two. And the other is, are they an ideal client? So are they somebody, and when I say that, I don't mean just, oh, am I going to sell them? Are they an ideal partner? Are they an ideal step in the process that I want to do? So sometimes, for example, I have a guest I want to get on my show. She's a A-list, name, like she's gotten a lot of traction. I have booked people who also bring immense value, but they're not well known, but they've worked in her circle. So I've been very deliberate to book people within that realm. I would just say lead with your credibility first and not just your name, like, for example, you work with Lipson, like that is going to draw people who are interested in the podcasting world. They're going to say, I want to build a relationship with that person. So I wouldn't lead with anything else before you say Lipson. We had a coaching client who does high performance coaching, and he wanted to start with that. He's also a former Major League Baseball player. I said, I don't care if you're a former Major League Baseball player, that's the draw. People are going to book you because you made that achievement. And he was actually a former Major League Baseball player and a 2-time CrossFit champion. So I was like, start with that, make your profile picture be something tied in with that, and use that to leverage what you're doing now. Because there's a lot of high performance coaches. There's a much smaller pool that have made it to the major leagues. So find the thing that you bring the most value in, bring that to the forefront. For me, it just means in my bio, including people like Sarah Edmondson, who has a HBO documentary, the NXIVM documentary, The Vow. Like, I include her early on in my pitches to people, saying I've had guests like this person, this person, this person. I'd love to add you to that lineup. So there's a couple pieces, but I would say just try to lead with, again, credibility first. Like, what's the thing about you that's going to draw people, and it might not be the name of your show. It might not be the name of your business. It might be, I work with Lipson, or it might be I had $1 billion exit, or $1 million, whatever that is. What's that first thing you can lead with?
It's funny. My fitness coach is a former Canadian all-star football player. I mean, like one of the best football players in the Canadian League. And I still don't think he understands how much he can leverage that as a trainer. I don't think he just doesn't get it.
look at Lewis Howes. You know what I mean? Like, that's a big piece of it's in his introduction, former NBA player. Like he wasn't like a Michael Jordan, but he did something that most people can't do. And he leveraged that, especially early on in the show, former pro athlete. I forget how his intro words it, but like, he knows the value of that career.
Right.
And even though it's not a big piece of the show, like, that's a really big credential boost early on when you're launching a show, talking to impressive people. You get to put yourself in that lineup. Even one of the guys I worked with, he made it to the Olympics. He didn't get a medal in it, but ex-Olympian turned real estate, ex-Olympian's more interesting than real estate investor. So you got to order it in the right way.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
So how important is topic and expertise, do you think?
I think topic, both are important, but for example, my show dealing with clergy abuse, like, my expertise comes from the length of episodes and the people that I've been connected with. And I don't think you should pretend to be an expert. Like, I don't pretend to be a psychologist or a therapist or a legal expert. But I have talked with, I've put out almost 200 episodes, 500,000 downloads, all those different accolades that you can throw into it. That's where you can lead with the value. And again, all of this, it depends on what you want to accomplish. Like, if you're trying to position yourself as someone worth listening to on a show, like, lead with your guests that are impressive people who have shared the stage with you. If you're looking to, it really depends. If you're looking to establish yourself as a business coach, like, sprinkle in facts about your business that you've grown that's done really well. I will throw in one more piece of this that we've done that's helped kind of drive the credibility piece home with our guests is, we have our guests do the bumper for the beginning of our episode. So once I get done with an interview with, say a John Maxwell, for example, you get done with John Maxwell, you get done with the interview. Hey, we do a quick bumper for the beginning of the episode, and you can send them through the chat through Zoom. And literally our bumper is something like, hi, my name is John Maxwell, author of fill in the blank with whatever leadership book you'd just written. And if you want to build your network, you need to be listening to the Build Your Network podcast with my good friend, Travis Chappell. So when someone tunes in to listen to John Maxwell, which is who in that conversation they're listening to hear from, the first thing that they're hearing in the first 5 seconds of your show is the person that they love and trust, John Maxwell, just said, you need to listen to build your network. So doing little things like that are going to help. One, it's going to help people keep listening and not feel like, oh, it's just someone commenting on a John Maxwell book. But also, it's an endorsement on every episode. We have 640 episodes of endorsements from high-level people, from Dean Graziosi, Tom Bilyeu, Aubrey Marcus, down the list of people. And we forever have that. We forever have that piece in the episode. So look for ways too, if someone goes to check out your show, like how quickly can they see those high-level people or those credibility pieces attached to you?
Yeah, it's like a host read ad that you got them to produce for you. It's kind of
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like you have Kevin Harrington, who's like the original shark from Shark Tank, like saying, hey, you need to, if you want to expand your network, you need to listen to my good friend, Travis Chappell. Like, and we've had one person, again, the ease of doing this, we've had one person in 600 and something episodes that said no, that they didn't want to do that. And it wasn't a high level person. it was, I don't even remember who it was, but it was not a John Maxwell. It was not a Grant Cardone, like all those people we have it. And also, another good piece on this as well is we do our compilation episodes, going back through old episodes. So we can literally have a compilation of those, 3 guests that we want to have talking about real estate. And we can start the episode with, hey, my name's Dean Graziosi. My name is Grant Cardone. My name is this. And if you want to know about how to grow your network, if you want to know how to build this, if you want to know how to do this, and you have them, all 3 of them saying, listen to my good friend, Travis Chappell, that is a shot in the arm of credibility. And again, you're not saying I'm this person, but I'm tied in with all of these different people. And I've spoken with hundreds of people that are on this level. And so again, it's just taking those little steps to leverage it in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, I think it's a great technique because it creates a win-win situation, because each of those guys are going to want to know that their name is going to be in more than one episode, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's also a cool thing. Like when we do these compilation episodes, when you have a guy who's like a lower tier guest, someone who's a really good guy, but he's not on the level of, say, a Grant Cardone as far as awareness. When he sees that he got released in a compilation episode where he's sandwiched between 2 heavy hitter people in his industry, he's going to share that episode with his audience. He's going to say like, hey, I'm featured in a reel with John Maxwell and this person, wow. Okay, cool. But he brought value. Again, where are they bringing credibility? Is it name recognition? Is it expertise? Some of the coolest people we've interviewed don't have a household name, but they can bring the value, and we can give them the credibility boost of listing them next to Jack Canfield or John Maxwell, or fill in the blank with a host of other names.
But if they have a fascinating angle or story to tell, that can make up for a lesser name.
It's worthwhile. Like I have plenty of guests. Some of my favorite guests on my show have been, people that no one would know. Like if I said, oh, my favorite interview was Dr. Kelly Palfy, that's one of my favorite interviews. You'd be like, okay,
who's
great, but she was one of the people that brought a ton of knowledge, and she's a really cool person. And, and again, a value add for her is when, she's big in Canada. I almost said Canada. In Canada, as a psychologist, that's where she lives. So when I was interviewed by the CBC in Canada, I said, hey, you guys should also check out my friend Kelly Palfy, who is actually qualified to talk about this and would bring a lot of value. And they didn't end up reaching out to her, but I shot her a message and said, hey, was thinking about you, was interviewed by CBC today, and gave them your name and contact info in case they needed a comment from you. So I still got the value of adding to her, and she looks at that relationship going like, okay, that's cool. Like I got a shout out in an interview with the CBC, by this guy that interviewed me on his podcast. So
awesome. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I know I said we cut it right at the hour, and I lied. But but Eric, wow, I appreciate you coming. Hopefully we'll keep in touch. Let us know in any way that we could be of service to you and the brand. What all your projects, feel free to reach out. If there's nothing else that you wanted to share or anybody else had, we could jump off and see you on the flip side.
Awesome. I'll see you guys on Guestio. That's
perfect.
My only push.
Thank you so much for the recommendation.
And definitely feel free to connect with me, LinkedIn, Facebook, anywhere like that. I'd love to stay in touch or answer any questions if you guys have anything else. But really appreciate the opportunity to jump on.
Awesome. We'll catch you later.